Welcome back to the Shopping Channel, everybody. And as usual, my favourite part of the week, wine time. And it is my absolute huge privilege and pleasure to have with me today David Babich from the Babich family estate stable of winemakers. Goodness me, that was pretty impressive. David, welcome to the show.
Thank you, great to be here.
I have been a fan of your family's wines for probably 30 years.
Yes.
I want you to tell me, because it's the most wonderful family history about your family and its history in winemaking in New Zealand.
Yes. Well, our family history began in the winemaking for New Zealand just about 100 years ago. My grandfather, on the very right in this photo, was born in Croatia with his brothers, and this is him with his brothers.
Yes.
And my great-grandparents were farmers over there in rural Croatia, and it's quite a poor area, so they were immigrating their children. Croatians were generally to other parts of the world for a better life, and my great-grandparents decided to send their boys to New Zealand. So they actually sent all of their boys away by the time they turned 16, and my grandfather actually was only 14 and came to New Zealand in pursuit of a better life. So when my grandfather was here, about 3 years after he arrived, he planted grapevines and shortly after started making wine.
So grapevines where? Where was the first of the Babich grapevines grown?
The first vines were actually grown right up in the very tip of New Zealand, up in Northland.
Oh, in Northland?
Yeah, well, they were gum diggers. They
yes,
came
of
out
course.
Here to dig gum.
So, and there is actually quite a nice wine little industry up in
Northland has a great industry.
Is that part of your family?
No, we bought land. My grandfather and his brothers bought land in Henderson in 1911.
Yes, of course. Yes.
And this is a picture of my grandfather here. He's in his 80s here, and they bought this land in 1911. But it was only after the First World War they could actually go down to the property and start breaking it in. Which was a bad time to do it, really, post First World War in New Zealand, leading straight into the Depression in the 30s.
So how many acres did they have in Auckland? This was in Henderson,
They bought
wasn't it?
an initial 70 acres. They put a deposit on it in 1911. They continued digging gum and making their money from gum digging, and my grandfather's making wine up in Northland. And then they came onto the property and planted grapevines in Henderson with fruit trees and maybe some cattle, that sort of thing. But between 1920 and 1940, my grandfather said they couldn't take £1 off the mortgage. It was that tight.
Is that right?
Yeah.
So David, the first grapes variety grown in Henderson?
Well, they were growing things like Cabernet and Merlot, but also other classic French varietals like Pinot Meunier.
Yes.
They had some of that. And then some things that probably don't exist so much in New Zealand grape growing these days.
Goodness me, that's an astonishing story. And so with the Babich family...
Yes.
You're representing which generation?
Well, I'm the third generation.
So you're the third generation of the Babich clan to be directly involved with making Babich family estate wines?
Yes. I'm a trained winemaker. These days I'm general manager of the winery.
Yes.
So I'm involved in a lot of the business side of the winery.
So you've led New Zealand winemakers in exporting. How was that?
Well, it's quite a funny story, actually. In about 1980, a tourist walks into the shop, and he's speaking with my father, and he's trying our wines, and he's quite impressed with it. And it turns out he's a German importer.
Of wine?
Yes.
Wow.
And
and?
So he says to my father, can I buy a container of wine? And a container holds 1,000 cases. Normally we're selling by the pallet or half pallet, which is 50 cases or 25. This guy wants to buy 1,000. So Dad says, look, no problem, here's some trade pricing, send us a cheque. When that clears, we'll send you the wine. Because he doesn't think, he's not sure this is valid, you know. So
yep.
Anyway, the cheque turns up on Monday, Dad banks it, it clears, and it's like, well, we're in business, we're in the exporting business. So
wow.
Packs up 1,000 cases and sends it up the road. For my grandfather, he was still alive then. He was 84, and he sees this wine going up the road. And for him, he'd turned up to New Zealand 70 years earlier, begun a wine business, and now he's sending wine back to Europe.
Must have been a huge... That's Joe, isn't it?
Yes, that's my grandfather.
Yes. So now, listen, you've now getting into organic wine growing.
Yes.
I mean, that's obviously a paradigm shift, or is it not?
Well, not really. We've always been very sustainable in our winemaking. It's been very important to my family. But a few years ago, we decided to develop an organic vineyard.
Right, and that's the shot that we're seeing on camera now.
Actually, that's the Henderson shot.
Oh, that's the Henderson shot.
That's the property that my grandfather bought with his brothers, and it was all bush back then, regenerating bush. And they cleared it and started these grapes that are on there, and the winery has sprung up over the years.
So getting back to the organic story.
Yeah, we were interested in organic winemaking, so we planted a vineyard and we started growing Sauvignon Blanc on that vineyard in Marlborough. And we've got example of this now. Now tell me about this beautifully bottled wine. I mean, I'm looking at the label, Babich Family Estate, individual vineyard. Yes.
Headwaters, Organic Block, Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc.
That's right. So the vineyard is the Headwaters Estate Sauvignon Blanc.
Yes, which is...
Well, it's right next to one of the rivers in Marlborough, and the profile of the vineyard is a little bit of dirt on top with stones in it, but underneath that is a very strong stony layer that's been laid down by the river that it runs alongside. Now, the thing with this wine is it really throws out this mineral character, which we refer to as an expression of terroir. So the grapevines pick up these minerals out of the stones, and they start expressing that style within the wine itself. So you smell this.
That is beautiful. And the package is the 6 bottles.
Yes.
$120.
That's right.
Of the Babich Family Estate Organic Block Sauvignon Blanc. Is this the 211 or 212 vintage that you're going to give
2011.
me? And that's the delivery within 72 hours. The $5 handling charge. $120 for this absolutely astonishingly beautiful. God, the nose on this is just sensational.
Yes.
And this is the Babich Family Estate Organic Block Sauvignon Blanc, 2011.
That's right.
David, I am privileged to have this wine in the studio, and I am going to actually really enjoy a sip of this outstanding. And I love the fact that this is a New Zealand family story, and it's exclusively wonderful. It's New Zealand wine at its absolute best, and $120.